travel, but excited to be here talking to each one of you. And essentially, before I begin the sort of conversation that I want to have with you guys here, essentially, what I want to introduce to you as a concept is something that's very different to what you guys are, as you get into your careers, will experience on a day-to-day basis. But one of the things that I've realized in my time working is the fact that the standard template to how work happens in organizations isn't the only way to sort of work. And then there is a whole different approach and a perspective that you have to challenge yourself to bring uh, to your organizations, to your own work. And this is obviously learnings that I've had over the time that I've been working. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right. All right. You guys should be seeing my screen now. All right. So the alternate thought that I want to bring to to this session is what I call the low touch, no touch approach to product strategy. Right? When you really think about the best software in the world, that what it really truly does is it does its job and it gets out of the way. For a lot of the younger generation, I don't know how many of you, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to just see if I can see everyone's screen. Right. So you guys may not know, I don't know how many of you are aware of the software WinRAR. Um, it's a RAR unarchiver. It's been free since it's ever been incepted way back in early 2000s, the beginning of the internet when they brought in these new versions. It is historically always been free, but it does its one job and one job really well, which is to unzip files. It became the standard for Windows and Macs for the longest time. So, that example might show a little bit of my age here, but I wanted to, if you get time to Google it, I think it's an important part of history or software history that is worth acknowledging the fact that some of the best products historically have always been about helping users do what they need to get done and then just sit back and be always ready. And in some cases, some softwares have gone beyond and sort of taken the toil away from the users. And that's kind of the strategy I want to talk to you about. Now, most software design is designed to be used. The best software is designed to be avoided. I know that sounds counterintuitive, especially in a world where we celebrate daily active users, time spent in a product, feature adoption, as if there were numbers, all those numbers were proof that we built something valuable. A lot of times you build these features in your career as you go on, and you will potentially, have all the right ideas, you have all the customer insights, you're solving a problem, and you would think that the customer loves you for it, but they still don't. And sometimes when you see numbers, they'll say, everything's working perfectly, but your customer will tell you otherwise, or your users will tell you otherwise, right? So the problem there isn't always about the design, it isn't about the user experience, and it's not even about the product features need. It's the moment where we need to step back and ask a more fundamental question. Why was this product hired in the first place? One of the things that we explore is the idea of a strategy that prioritizes outcomes over interaction, value over engagement, and trust over retention. And that shift from designing for use to designing for absence is what I want you guys to walk away with today. So let's talk about the engagement tribe. Let's start with how we currently define success. Now, what today most softwares, more organizations will make you focus on are these metrics: daily active users, the amount your users spending in the product, the clicks per session, what was the feature adoption rates. You hear this with a lot of existing strategies. We'll see that with most products. And they do make sense. And a lot of the situations, they are still very good metrics and valuable metrics. because they are telling you something. No data is bad data. It's just the context in which that data becomes valuable, right? And I think that matters, right? What these metrics are telling us is that people are showing up, whether features are getting used or not, or whether engagement is moving. But look at what actually matters to the people we build for. The people we build for outcomes, right? Was I able to get the job done, right? What was the effort required to get there? Do you trust the system in which it was made? Work that disappears because the software handled it. If it's a workflow that you just don't want to, it's too repetitive. And that's where AI is sort of coming into the picture as well, is that uh, you know technology is evolving to a point where it wants to take care of a lot of the work that you really need to do, and then let you focus on some of the more critical stuff. And we'll touch upon that as well. So when you line these two columns up next to each other, a really uncomfortable question surfaces. What if the metrics on the left are, in many cases, actively working against the outcomes on the right? Now, more time in the product doesn't always mean more value delivered. It often means more effort, more configuration, more overhead. Right? We've heard that a lot, right? Too many clicks are happening, or the user spending 15 minutes to do a job that actually could have been done in 10 minutes, right? There's a book I would recommend to everyone called The Mom Test. If you ask your mom whether she loves if you show her your artwork and you ask her, do you love it? She'll always say it's the best, painting ever. It's the best drawing ever. And that often happens is that if we often would look at metrics like this and say, people are on my product, they're using it all the time, they're spending hours on it. The reality is that they are spending hours because it's either not doing the job well enough, or it just takes too long to get there. And these are all important metrics, right? And that's the trap that I want you all to avoid in the future, is the fact that we measure engagements as if it were value. But for the person using software, engagement is often the cost of getting value, not the value itself. So let's reframe. The Jobs to be Done framework by Clay Christensen captures this idea really cleanly. Users don't buy products, they hire them to make progress in a specific situation. He brought up a famous milkshake study in his book, and it's been widely quoted by a lot of marketing people, even in the product space. There was a fast food chain that wanted to sell more milkshakes. They tried everything: new flavors, thicker shakes, bigger cups, but nothing really moved the needle, right? Until someone asked a very different question: what job are customers hiring this milkshake to do? Now, it turns out most milkshakes were being bought early in the morning by people heading out into a long commute. They weren't hiring the milkshake to compete with other milkshakes. They were hiring it to compete with a banana, a bagel, or a snack bar, right? People considered a banana, but wasn't really filling enough. A bagel was fine, but a little messy. A chocolate bar was just unhealthy. But something that was filling, something one-handed, something that needed to last the whole drive. And that's where the milkshake was being hired. So the milkshake wasn't competing with other milkshakes alone. It was competing with all the other foods that could potentially be used in that scenario. And the moment I read this in my career, and the moment I started to apply this, or moment you would start to, reframe your thinking into this aspect, your product strategy completely changes. And the same logic applies to softwares that we build or we will build. A colleague of mine in sales put it to be that stuck with me, is the fact that people don't hire us to solve their business problems. They hire us to help them do business better. They don't, like, I work with Monotype. They don't just want fonts. They just want to be able to do things with fonts better, whether that's the licensing, whether that's the discovery of it. And when we start to realize that it isn't about 100 fonts or 200 fonts or 300,000 fonts in some cases, it became about the fact that people wanted that, but they wanted to be able to do and work with that a lot better. They wanted us to help them take the toil of managing away from them. Organizations don't adopt software because they want more tools. They adopt software because they want to do less work. They hire products to remove work they don't want to do, and they want to avoid hiring people for repeatable tasks. They want to reduce the friction, the rework, and the risk, and to make outcomes more predictable. Every one of those jobs is about absence, not presence. So the less you notice the product doing its job, the better it's doing its job. To quote McKinsey's research on this, that if a product is hired to do a job, then every click, every configuration step, every manual decision is consuming time, attention, and cognitive energy from the person who hired it. Today, most product strategies still optimize for interaction, more workflows, more dashboards, more settings. Engagements is considered the proxy for value, right? Product analysts might come back, or big data dashboards will tell us these beautiful numbers of active engagement, but nobody really asks on what are they engaging them? Why are they engaging with that? And often that is that surface level that often, turns potentially great products into average ones, or for even great products to even lose their direction. McKinsey talked about this number, about 30 to 40% reduction in operational effort when routine knowledge is automated, which means that this isn't just a strategic win. These are the kind of numbers that show up in margins, in retention, and renewal conversations. If you look at Forrester's research that they've done for Figma and a lot of these tools, they'll talk about return on investments, right? What they're saying is that because with our software, you're able to do things a lot faster, you're essentially making more money or saving more money, right? And that's the sell. And as much as all of us in UX are talk about usability and the users, what our boards and product leaders and executives care about is or even customers for that matter, will ask us, what business value? Why should I spend a couple of $100 per person to get the software or to hire your product to solve it? So the strategic question stops being how do we make this workflow nicer to use, right? And as UX designers or product leaders, however the world is evolving, whatever path you guys go down to, the question needs to move away from how do I make this workflow easier or nicer to use, and start asking the question of, can this job be completed with minimal interaction or none at all? And that's the foundation of the low touch, no touch product strategy I want to discuss with you today. And that's the question I want you to sit with before we go any further. I want you guys to all just take a minute. I want to have a conversation with you about any product that you can think of. Pick one workflow in that product and ask that, how many of these clicks actually require a human decision and how many are just overheads? If you guys have access to chat, if not, let's just take 2 minutes for anyone to just bring it up. Could we do that, Haley? While we're unmuting, I'd love for you guys to just think about it. Think of any product.
Oh, okay, cool.
There we go.
Oh, okay, that's what he said. Oh, my bad. Here we go. Cool.
Yeah, I can hear everyone. That's perfect.
Okay. Cool, great.
Anybody in the room?
You can also, we have you unmuted, and the camera also works as a microphone. So if anybody wants to say something, or if anybody wants to specifically say something into the
I was gonna say this is one that's just like in my daily life, and
Mhm.
it's kind of like a low stakes one, but with Candy Crush, there's more and more pop-ups for things, and they try to
Mhm.
like make people more engaged by like having different storylines and stuff. And I have to click
Yeah.
through so many different pop-ups. It's like I just want to play the game. And then I think
Yeah.
about all of like the older people that are playing this and they're just getting so confused. I'm like, I'm getting confused by this, and this is all unnecessary. So I wish they would just like get rid of all of those unnecessary steps.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example of products would often throw that in to get more engagement because they will nudge and nudge and nudge. A classic example would be Duolingo. I think Duolingo's notifications are legendary in the way that they're almost saying you're not learning, and it often feels like a threat more than it feels like a nudge back. But that's what a lot of products would do. So I think Candy Crushes is a great example where for them, because engagement is such a high metric, because it's a game. The more active users, the more you're clicking, the more you're sticking around, and that's just often a strategy you'll see with products. And I think you gave a good example as a user, you just want to get the game going.
Yeah.
So for me, the success metric here would be, is my customer happy? Is my user being going straight in the game, spending 20, 30 minutes, clearing levels, and that's what matters. So yeah. Anyone else?
I agree with the games. Sorry, I agree about the games
Mhm.
that made me that did make me think about how I've noticed a lot of like games, I guess, have kind of shifted maybe over the past 10 years from kind of having one simple like objective in your game to having like many levels. They have I've noticed like specifically that a lot of games seem to include like now these other tasks like what is I don't remember. It's like the one where you like, try to get three fruits or whatever, and it's like I don't remember what that's called. Does anyone is that Candy Crush? I feel like so many things games and apps try to include like features of other games or apps, which leads to them all becoming like it loses the purpose of choosing that app over a different app in the first place. And I feel like that
Mhm.
kind of like I understand the idea of wanting to expand your features, but it also takes away from having one objective that no other app can like do as well. And by losing
Yes.
that focus, you like kind of lose that like that user base who's coming there for that one feature.
So that's a great example of what you'd see with a lot of, and again, as you get in, one of the most common techniques is, hey, my competitor or this person's doing X and that's working for them. We should also do that. So there is a point where certain software start to lose the reason people adopted it, the differentiation, right? It stops being unique. And I think this is the challenge you guys will, and this is what I would encourage you to challenge as you get into your career, into organization, saying, am I maintaining the unique reason why people adopted me in the first place, right? If it's a game mechanic, whether it is a workflow, right? When every software does the same thing, then it doesn't become about the software's differentiation. It becomes which is cheaper. And that's what it always comes down to. Any software in consideration, I know with the, even in my organization, when we're comparing softwares to adopt, we're looking at what has what capability. And when I have two of them that has maybe the most minor difference, we're always going to go for the cheaper one. And not because we think that the one doesn't have, it's a value conversation. And that's when it starts to change of, I don't think me spending, let's say, an X $1,000 extra is going to give me an incremental value over this, or it's solving it in a manner that nobody else does. So you'll see that with games, you'll see that with software. Often, this is where products start to lose that differentiation. In marketing, as when I did spend time in agencies, we used to say, what's the single-minded takeaway that your product does that nobody else does, right? What do you do so differently that nobody else is doing it? And it could be you could do 5 things that other softwares are doing, but you're doing this one thing that nobody else is doing. And you don't talk about the 5 things, you always talk about that one thing, right? Think of a toothpaste. Every toothpaste is essentially at its core is supposed to, make your mouth smell fresh, clean your teeth, etc., remove plaque. But if you look at some of the classic, a lot of products, they'll completely zoom into one aspect and absolutely make that their hero, right? I think Sensodyne became all about tooth sensitivity. They're doing everything, but they made it saying that if that's an issue you need to deal with, we're the go-to product. And that's when Sensodyne, if you have that issue, Sensodyne became the go-to product, right? Because they'll build that trust, because they solve that problem. And I think that's the mindset you want to get into when you're thinking about any product. What can I do to help my customer achieve or my user achieve what he wants to achieve with the least amount of effort, with as quickly as possible? Or there's also the idea that we'll talk about is, should we just get out of the way of them? Should I just take care of this problem for them? And that's becomes your differentiation. So for everyone else, I would also say, think about these products. We'll probably come back to that workflow and do another minor exercise. So let's talk about what low touch really means. So I've used the word low touch a lot, and I want to be precise about what it does and what it doesn't mean, because it can get, misunderstood. Now, being a low touch product isn't just about simplicity. A low touch experience is still capable of handling complex jobs. What changes is when the user is asked to participate. Users interact only when setup, judgment, or exception handling is genuinely required, right? The term you would hear about this is called, agency. It's the aspect where the user needs control or warrants a user's control into it, right? And where it is genuinely required. Everything else is handled, right? Low touch does not mean underpowered. Common tasks are fast, predictable, bounded. You're not removing capability. You're just removing the unnecessary steps between the user and the outcome. And low touch, and this is important for all of us, is the fact that it does not mean less user experience. It means UX that's optimized for time to value instead of time and product. It's an intentional interaction, right? Every moment the user spends inside the product is earning its keep. So if I'm spending more time playing the game, the example of Candy Crush is that if I'm doing more levels, then that's success. That's what I care about. I care that you're able to get in, you're completing 5 levels a day, 6 levels a day, right? If you're stuck, you're not permanently stuck. And there is pathways that I, as a product, can provide for you to get out of it, whether that is, additional help or, reducing the complexity to some degree. Like, it's all controllable to a degree, right? You want your users to be challenged, but not completely blocked, right? And historically, if you look at classic games and classic software, it was you have to, climb that hill to cross it. And that in itself is an achievement. And certain softwares obviously enable that. But in most cases, the way it is, most people don't have the time. And it's important for software to sort of enable them more, where they have to do less of the thinking part. Now, remember that well-designed low-touch products will feel calm. They don't demand attention. And they earn trust. Forrester did a CX research and showed this consistently, is that meeting functional expectations is table stakes. Differentiation comes from reducing effort and making users feel confident, and not by piling on features. Now, low touch is the baseline. And now no touch concepts is what is taking the idea one step further, right? With the recent boom in AI technology, with Anthropic recently, in fact, just yesterday coming out with their design capabilities as well, we're slowly and surely moving in a no touch model, right? Where software doesn't wait to be instructed, it's acting. In a no-touch software, it automates repeatable work, the thing that shouldn't need a person in the loop at all. It detects patterns and anomalies early before they become problems that the user has to clean up. And it resolves unknown problems proactively, not by asking the user what to do, but doing the things that users would have asked for. This is where software stops behaving like a tool and starts behaving like infrastructure. Think about electricity, right? You don't think about how electricity works or what it does till it stops working. And that's the bar for infrastructure. PwC did a research that called out this, and they put it really well, was that they found customers typically only notice technology when it fails, slows them down, or creates friction, right? As you think about your games, as you think about this other softwares and workflows, think about those products. Is that how many products or how many softwares you only think about when they have stopped working, right? And you've consciously thought about them often at the moments of its failing. The best software operates quietly in the background, doing its job so well that users don't have to think about it at all. Now, let's talk about the counterpart of it, right? What about heavy use software, software that you need to spend hours on? I give a classic example of Jira. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jira by Atlassian, but in the professional space, I have not met anyone other than agile practitioners who love Jira. In fact, I don't think some of them love it really, but like they use it a lot. But most designers, more product managers, most people when hate having to work with Jira, spend hours creating sprints, putting up tasks, closing tickets, assigning story points. Like it's a whole thing. But it's important to realize that but understand that Jira is still one of the biggest softwares in the world. Atlassian is one of the biggest companies in the world. If people hated it so much, we wouldn't be using it at all. It does solve real problems for very large organizations. It's used every single day by millions of people. But the important part is that it does demand attention. It requires configuration. It really is a heavily, a product that involves real cognitive load. Atlassian themselves have acknowledged that the tool sprawl and configuration complexity are amongst the biggest contributors to user frustration. They know that their software isn't loved, and they know all of this complexity is one of the reasons. But that's exactly the gap that challenges like ClickUp and Linear emerged, right? They didn't add more. They rethought the trade-offs, simplified the workflows, and reduced setup friction. When you study or if you look up the subject, you see ClickUp and other softwares like Linear are maybe mostly adopted in some of the smaller setups where they don't need all of that high levels of configuration, while softwares like Jira are very widely adopted in some of your Fortune 500 companies or large organizations, especially in the tech space. Both approaches have their job, right? Some jobs do not require, any input or very minimal to none. And in some cases, some jobs genuinely require the power and configuration, the configurability. But the long-term signal is unmistakable. Jira introduced AI and other softwares and automations to reduce that toil. Users are expecting more and more day by day for software to do more while asking less of them. And the direction of travel is one way. All right. So how do you design for low touch? The first pattern is pattern recognition over configuration. Traditional products force users to configure everything up front, right? Games being a great example. Every preference, every rule, every setting. That's expensive for users. You're asking users to predict their own behavior or even be aware of them in the first place. A low-touch product does the opposite. It learns. It watches for repeated actions, time-based workflows, consistent decision patterns, and when confidence is high, it offers to take over. The user never has to configure anything. The product earns the permission. Contextual nudges, not interruptions. I give Google Maps as a great example. It always nudges me to navigate home at the end of the day. I never had to set it up. Didn't have a learning curve. It obviously understood certain patterns in my travel and my behavior and was able to give me um, references, or it just popped it up at the scenario when I needed to, right? It understood based on my repeated patterns of behavior or the certain times of day, and understood that that he's probably going home, right? A lot of this, like Alexa and other tools, are still in that infancy where they're still asking you to configure that stuff. But imagine a future where if you've repeatedly turned the lights on at sunset or at a certain day, you expect your, if you're able to see the pattern of the user turning on their aircon every day at a certain point, you could start to take over and then allow the user to decide whether he wants to keep going or take that off the way. And that's what we're talking about, smart technology. It's not interrupting me, but it knows enough that it makes an attempt to do more for me rather than me having to ask the software. And in some cases where you do want them to, you want those one-click resolutions for no problems. When an issue follows a known pattern and the system understands the problem and the standard resolution, the whole workflow should just collapse. You don't walk the users through 7 steps to do something the product already knows how to do. You give them the button, one action, and the rest of it. The intent of a low-touch software isn't to take control away, it just takes the effort away from the user. I want to take a second here for any open questions. Any?
I have a question. So
Sure.
I've experienced what you're talking about with the example of how it learns, like Google Maps learns your patterns and then suggests where to go. Is there a line that developers have to navigate between having the low touch, getting the routines and making lives easier versus people feeling kind of uneasy that the technology is like learning their patterns? Or do you think it's like more user preference?
It's a preferencing. So the way that if you think about how users are working today, I mean, Claude is a great, and ChatGPT is a clear example. I saw a tweet today. Somebody said that we're a generation that was offended when they asked us to allow for cookies, and now we're giving ChatGPT our entire life history, our details, and everything. The fact is that the way technology is evolving, I think, and as the users evolving, I think we've come to a point where they're willing to allow for software. If it is genuinely solving a problem, I think there is a desire to allow software to take over. Users will always give up that agency over and control over time. And I think that's where confidence has to be built up. So you may start with configurations and then build it up into a point where you take it away, where you stop asking users for it, and then let that naturally adopt. And I think that you see as software starts to emerge. So the fine line is users will honestly tell you themselves where they don't feel comfortable. And that's when you draw the line and take a step back. So the idea is always to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back with any software or anything that you're designing. If users, when they feel the friction, they will tell you as such. Or if they don't feel confident, then you want to take that step back and let them build that up. So the line is of always moving. And sometimes what you will learn over time is the fact that you might see long-term customers start to give you a little bit more of that control. So sometimes it's a timing thing, but it's good to always have those layers thought through. Often I've seen is that we often hard code it or don't build our softwares and features for scale. And scale could be volume, could also mean time, or the tenure of the user. So that flexibility doesn't sit within the capability. It's just then you have to sit and spend another 2-3 sprints to redo everything because users are hitting a wall and they're getting frustrated.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
A question. I was wondering if there were any examples that really showcase this low touch, no touch concept. other than just like general AI tools like Claude and ChatGPT?
Netflix is a great example. If you think about Netflix, the more you browse, the more it learns and the more it gives. Classic, even automation and recommendation engines are great examples of low touch. Your ability to discover or rediscover shows often happens because Netflix has spent a lot of time. Spotify is a great example. Um, your you might it, it learns that you like certain artists and can start to tell you if their new album is coming out, or it'll create a playlist based on um, similar artists or similar music or different albums. These are two softwares that traditionally over time will understand that your music taste may be changing or evolving, and based on certain times it can give you recommendations.
Thank you.
Awesome. If no more questions, I'll proceed. Now, yes, we have to talk about AI because in 2026, if we're not talking about it, then we're missing a plot. And it's fortunately and unfortunately, in some cases, we can't ignore it. Then how, historically, you could sort of put VR technology aside or augmented reality aside and say, we're not in the practical space yet. But, the more and more I'm in this field, the more and more I'm talking to people, the more conversations are happening. It's become to a point where we can't exactly ignore it. Now, as we think about AI, even in our context, in our organization, as I think about AI from a user experience perspective, the way that we're thinking about it is that it's becoming an accelerant to the idea of a low touch, no touch, not as a feature, but as an enabler. And I'll give you some examples. And it's live on my fonts. If you go to my fonts, we've released an AI search. And again, AI because of the term, but it's actually a natural language search where you could say, I'm looking for a font that's, whatever, if you want to give it a project context or any context. Now, we've been wanting to bring that in as a capability for years, but trying to tie natural language and the nuances of language for across the world into a search engine can often be technically become very difficult. And any historical effort we've done minus AI has only resulted in bad output. And that's not us saying it, that's our customers who said it's not as smart as you think it is. And they were right. As much as we tried to make it better, it wasn't there until the point that we used AI, and that we started to see a significant jump in difference in how users responded to the results we were presenting, right? And the real promise of AI wasn't in just smarter interfaces. In some cases, it's fewer interfaces. In certain cases, as we imagine the future of font filtering, it can often become more nuanced. So rather than, how Zara and H&M on their websites, or even Amazon for that example, has this fixed menu of filters, the future is where you can say, I want you to filter based on these very specific and unique interactions, right? Being able to say, I want a font that has this very specific ampersand sign with this very specific glyph, and having to build that as a usable interface feels like a lot of effort, with each customer and each user having their own unique approach. So imagine a future where you just told it how to filter and it just did it. And that's the idea as we think about AI. And if you think about the role of AI in a low touch, no touch future, the idea is to not just make them smarter, but to reduce the number of interfaces required. It doesn't mean it's all chat, but it means that we have to be smart in the way that we use AI. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Forrester captured this well, that they describe generative AI as elevating work by removing low value effort, freeing time for higher order thinking, and not replacing human judgment. Removing the low value work that surrounds judgment, that's a very different product brief than put a chatbot on it. I recently also completed a certification in AI systems, and this professor that who's teaching us also touched upon it. Is that because this is obviously a very hot topic right now, and I think he said this well, is that AI has in itself existed in a form through automation or through basic functions. Even Gmail's spam filter is artificial intelligence in some degree. And I think it's only now that it's become more visual that it scares us, but it has always been part of the human experience of the software realm for almost decades now, right? It just starts to feel a little bit more. Now, we can all go down the path of, oh my God, UX is dead, which is everything I see on Twitter and LinkedIn these days. But I would encourage you to say is, how could I use AI as a tool, as a ingredient to solve for my users' need state? There are two ways that I would encourage you. I found it useful to build it into two, which is the intrinsic AI and extrinsic. Intrinsic AI is the AI that enhances what it already exists. This is that silent layer where it sits, understands the user, takes care of a lot of the redundant tasks, and just makes the workflow better in a subtle but slightly obvious way, right? It understands your files, it understands imagery, unstructured data, things that would require or that used to require human intervention. Just interprets it, not just metadata, but it helps users make faster decisions between the alternates. It reduces the manual review and comparison work that eats up so many hours. The interface is not about getting bigger. It's about the outcomes getting sharper, and that's the idea of an intrinsic AI, right? I will give a real life example in my industry. When you purchase fonts, there are font licenses. One of the things we hear a lot is people get confused with font licenses or what they can do and what they can't do. Think about, what if I introduced an AI layer that wasn't explicit, but it understood enough to be able to guide you when you're doing certain tasks or when you are confused. It just takes care of any of those scenarios where, hey, you're good to publish, don't worry about it. Or, hey, this that you're making doesn't sit in the realm and this might cause you issues and you might need to get more licenses or different types of licenses in order to release that. And that could exist as just a layer that's constantly just making sure that you're safe. The extrinsic AI aspect is a little different. It handles the edge cases that we can't design for, because no matter how robust your UI is, there'll always be unique business rules, unusual queries, specific needs that don't fit any predefined workflows. And historically, we handle this with configuration screens, more filters, more settings. And what you realize is that's how products float. And that's how they get hard to use. So extrinsic AI is handling edge cases that you can't exactly design on, right? It could be a temporary UI that presents itself. It's working across existing APIs rather than having to do that. Just a glimpse ahead, I want to zoom out for a second. It's reasonable to imagine where things are headed in the near future. If even in this year, I've seen software and workflows evolve dramatically, not just for product design or UX, but graphic design. I think there's just been, where I think all of you are also sitting at the cusp of a change that the industry goes through every decade or so. I have maybe experienced one-ish, and maybe this is the second one that I'm experiencing. For me, it was web design happened on Photoshop. Web development used to be slices of images that were assembled on a table for a website. We've moved away from that to what has become real life, vectors and, JavaScripts, and just so much that's happening. And now we're obviously in a new era that seems to be, I don't even know what that's headed to. So I want to reiterate for each of you is that the whole UX is dead argument, UX is changing, et cetera, you hear that a lot. But remember that products will remain partially standardized. The core scaffolding stays familiar because familiarity is valuable. But large portions of the experience will adapt dynamically to the user's role, context, and intent. Menus, layouts, and workflows won't be fixed, they'll be fluid, not arbitrary, but purpose-built. Now, you might think, does that mean UI goes away or the craft of this is going away? I want you all to always remember that it will always matter. Craft and clarity remains essential. A fluid experience needs more design rigor than a fixed one, not less. Someone still has to decide what clarity looks like when the interface is changing underneath the user. You still need the user to get the job done. And no matter what the technology involves, great design, it shows that that's the objective and always sort of ties all these different pieces of technology, what exists today, what has existed, and what will exist tomorrow into sort of a single, harmony. What will change is the scope of UX. UX expands to include adaptability, inference, and intelligence as first-class concerns, not as someone else's problems, not an engineering detail, as design concerns. As designers, those who see this early are the ones who will shape what the next decade of software looks like. The future of design of software isn't about being used more. It's about being relied on enough to disappear. That's where the strongest product strategies are headed. That's where I hope yours are headed to. Thank you.
Unfortunately, it does seem like we are about to run out of time before our next session. We might have time for like one question. Anyone has anything?
Yeah, I have a question. So I really like how you said that products are hired by users.
Do you want to stay?
And, sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, so I really like how you said that products are hired by users, and usually, when products are adopted by users, it requires change. And a challenge that I've seen in my organization is change management. How can we encourage that change as designers for these users whose, processes are now quote unquote disrupted by new products with the promise that it'll improve their processes? How can we encourage them to change? Because it's so hard for us just as people.
Yeah, because it's the value of the change that matters. If I tell you to change your workflow without telling you how it's going to save you significant amount of time or effort or remove it altogether, we're not going to value it. We value a new phone because it has significant value, whether that is a social value, whether that is a functional value. Apple, I always think has done this well. I would debate whether design hasn't evolved or not, but their always value has been where you're going to be able to do this better. Any customers we worked with that demands a certain change of a workflow, one of the things we did was to walk them through and how it is better. So change management is going to require a lot of conversation with users themselves to educate them on why this is more valuable to them. Have them experience it, and if they do feel the value, they're willing to adopt to that change. They'll change themselves if they do see enough value in that change.
Thank you.
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time. The next session will begin in about 4 minutes. Thank you for coming to talk at UX Days.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Oh, it's you gotta drag it over to the.
Oh, yeah.
Drag it over to your. Yeah. I'm just gonna. I can also just like.